In a matter of seconds, I was grabbed, thrown to the floor, my face dragged across the mud, and seconds later my mother collapsed next to me.
In 1992, this young woman was murdered in broad daylight on Wimbledon Common in front of her 2-year-old son.
Essentially, we were looking at 3 separate murder investigations and rape inquiries. Each team has its own strong tribal interior working.
Today's confession from the killer of young mother Rachel Nickell on Wimbledon Common brings to a close one of the most damning episodes in Scotland Yard's history.
The murder of Rachel Nickell on Wimbledon Common is one of the most devastating and institutionally catastrophic criminal cases in modern British history, not only for the brutality of the crime itself, but for what followed, a police investigation that destroyed an innocent man's life while the real killer remained free to kill again. At its centre is Rachel Jane Nickell, a 23-year-old mother whose life was taken on a summer morning in July 1992 in front of the one witness who could never testify, her 2-year-old son, Alex. What should have been an ordinary walk through one of London's most beloved parks instead became the starting point of a 16-year odyssey through investigative obsession, psychological manipulation, and institutional failure that would ultimately claim 2 more innocent lives before the truth was finally uncovered. Wimbledon Common in southwest London is a place of quiet beauty. 800 acres of woodland, heathland and ponds, a sanctuary from the noise of the city. On the morning of July 15th, 1992, the weather was warm for an English summer. Rachel Nickell decided to take her son Alex for a walk. She was a young mother, German-born but long settled in London, described by those who knew her as gentle, artistic and deeply devoted to her child. She and Alex lived in a small flat in Wimbledon with her partner, Andre Hanscom, an Australian artist. They were not wealthy. They were building a life. Pause. Rachel and Alex walked hand in hand toward a secluded area of the common known as the Dells, a small wooded valley crossed by a stream. It was a place Rachel loved. Somewhere between late morning and early afternoon, their walk turned into a scene of unspeakable violence. A passerby discovered Alex clinging to his mother's body, covered in blood, repeating the same word over and over, "Mummy." Rachel had been stabbed 49 times. She had also been subjected to a sexual assault. Her throat had been cut. The savagery of the attack suggested rage beyond comprehension, a level of violence that seasoned detectives would later describe as among the worst they had ever seen. Alex, just 2 years old, could not tell investigators what had happened. He was the only eyewitness, and he was too young to form the words. The police had a crime scene of extraordinary brutality, a traumatized child, and no suspect. The Metropolitan Police launched one of the largest murder investigations in their recent history. Dozens of officers were assigned, hundreds of people were interviewed. The public, horrified by the killing of a young mother in broad daylight, demanded results. Within days, the police had a profile. The killer was likely a local man, someone who knew the common well. He was probably a loner, socially isolated, possibly with a history of violence or deviant behavior. The profile was not unreasonable, but what happened next would become a textbook example of how investigative tunnel vision can destroy the pursuit of justice.
The Nickell murder squad was hindered by lack of evidence. There was a minute speck of what at the time was regarded as organic material, but the science of the early 90s was not enough to mark it as DNA. So the police are starting from a very difficult place.
A witness came forward. He had been walking on the common that morning and had seen a man near the scene. The man was described as scruffy, wearing a dark jacket. The witness helped produce a composite sketch. The police distributed it widely. Then came a name: Colin Stagg, a 29-year-old unemployed man who lived near the common. He walked his dog there every day. He was single, socially awkward, and fit the emerging profile of a loner. When officers knocked on his door, Stagg was cooperative. He volunteered information. He had been on the common that morning. He had seen Rachel Nickell. He had even noticed her dog. What should have been a routine witness interview instead became the foundation of a catastrophic accusation. The police became convinced Colin Stagg was their man, not because of evidence, but because he seemed strange. He was interested in the occult. He collected knives. He was a virgin at 29. None of this made him a killer, but in the minds of the investigators, it made him capable of becoming one. What followed was not an investigation. It was a fabrication. The police decided to run a honey trap operation, an undercover scheme in which a female officer going by the pseudonym Lizzie James would befriend Colin Stagg through correspondence and attempt to extract a confession. Over the course of several months, Lizzie exchanged dozens of letters with Stagg, building an intimate sexualized relationship entirely by design. The letters grew increasingly explicit. The police were guiding the narrative, pushing Stagg toward violent fantasies in the hope that he would reveal knowledge of the murder. He never did. Despite months of manipulation, despite being led toward increasingly dark territory, Colin Stagg never confessed to killing Rachel Nickell. He never demonstrated any specific knowledge of the crime. He repeatedly denied any involvement, but the police had already decided he was guilty, and they pressed forward with charges regardless. In August 1993, Colin Stagg was arrested and charged with Rachel Nickell's murder. He spent 13 months in prison awaiting trial. The case against him was built on nothing more than the undercover letters, his unusual personality, and the fact that he had been near the scene.
That on the 15th of July, 1992, Wimbledon Common, you murdered Rachel Nickell, causing her death by multiple stab wounds.
These are police videotapes of Colin Stagg's interrogation. His legal team gave us complete access to his defense case. He's always protested his innocence and pointed to a lack of any forensic evidence.
And look at the fantasies as they progressed as you've written to Lizzie Jones. The increasing deviance, the increasing domination, the increasing violence, the need to humiliate and dominate.
Stagg was about to realize that the woman he'd been meeting wasn't a potential girlfriend, she was an undercover policewoman.
Do you remember this letter now, Colin? The man then goes over to his pile of clothes and produces some string and a knife. Up until this point in time, I have never mentioned a fantasy with a knife with you. Up until this point in time, I never mentioned a fantasy to you. Do you remember that? And you told me the police had shown you photographs of how Rachel Nickell was lying at the time she was murdered. And you in fact lay down in that position. You lay down like a baby, like this, do you remember? And you curled and you had your hands like this. And you told me that her head was tilted back slightly, like this. Do you remember? Do you remember that, Colin?
In September 1994, the trial began at the Old Bailey. It collapsed within weeks. The judge, Mr. Justice Ognall, ruled that the honey trap evidence was inadmissible, describing the operation as deceptive conduct of the grossest kind. The prosecution had no case. Colin Stagg was acquitted. He walked out of court a free man, but not an innocent one, not in the eyes of the public and not in the eyes of the media that had spent 2 years portraying him as a monster. His life had been destroyed. He received death threats. He could not find work. He moved from place to place, haunted by a crime he did not commit. The real killer, meanwhile, remained free. While the Metropolitan Police obsessed over Colin Stagg, a far more dangerous man was living and killing in the same city. His name was Robert Napper. He was 26 years old in 1992. He lived in Plumstead, southeast London, with his mother. He was tall, awkward, deeply disturbed. He had a history of violence against women, a history that was known to the authorities. In 1989, he had been convicted of possessing a firearm and carrying a knife. He had been accused of rape, but not charged. His name had appeared in multiple police reports. And yet, during the Rachel Nickell investigation, Robert Napper was never a suspect. His name did not surface. The police, blinded by their certainty about Colin Stagg, had failed to connect the dots that were staring them in the face. On November 3rd, 1993, just months after Colin Stagg was charged, Robert Napper struck again. He broke into the home of Samantha Bissett, a 27-year-old woman who lived alone with her 4-year-old daughter, Jasmine. What he did inside that flat in Plumstead defies description. Samantha was stabbed, mutilated, and dismembered. Jasmine was smothered. The crime scene was so horrific that one of the attending officers later said he had never seen anything like it in his entire career. This time, Napper was caught. His fingerprint was found at the scene. In 1995, he was convicted of the double murder and sent to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and Asperger's syndrome. He had been, by any measure, one of the most dangerous men in Britain, and the police had missed him completely while they ruined an innocent man's life. It would take more than a decade for the truth to be officially acknowledged. In the years following Napper's conviction, the Rachel Nickell case remained officially unsolved. Colin Stagg, though acquitted, remained under a cloud of suspicion. The Metropolitan Police, publicly humiliated by the failed prosecution, refused to reopen the investigation, despite growing evidence that Napper was the real killer. Stagg himself spent years campaigning for his name to be cleared, for someone in authority to say the words that should have been said long before, "You are innocent." The breakthrough came in 2004. Advances in DNA technology allowed forensic scientists to re-examine evidence from the Wimbledon Common crime scene. The results were definitive. DNA found on Rachel Nickell's body matched Robert Napper. The probability that it belonged to anyone else was infinitesimal. Even then, the acknowledgement was slow. It was not until 2008, 16 years after the murder, that the Metropolitan Police formally accepted that Robert Napper was Rachel Nickell's killer. Colin Stagg received an official apology and £706,000 in compensation. No amount of money could restore the years he had lost, the reputation that had been destroyed, or the life he should have lived. Robert Napper, already confined to Broadmoor for the Bissett murders, was formally declared the perpetrator. He admitted to the killing in a statement read to the court. He would never stand trial for Rachel's murder. He was deemed too mentally ill, but the official record, at last, reflected the truth. Today, the murder of Rachel Nickell stands as one of the most painful cautionary tales in the history of British criminal justice. It is a case that exposes with brutal clarity what happens when investigators decide they know the answer before they have asked the right questions. Colin Stagg, the man who lost everything for a crime he did not commit, has spent the remainder of his life in the shadow of an accusation that should never have been made. He was not a killer. He was a casualty of a system that chose a convenient narrative over an inconvenient truth. Robert Napper, the man who took Rachel Nickell's life, who destroyed Samantha and Jasmine Bissett, remains in Broadmoor, a living reminder that the most dangerous predators do not always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they are hidden in plain sight, protected by the very institutions that are meant to stop them. But until the full accounting of every failure is truly understood, the story of Rachel Nickell remains unfinished. A haunting reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied, but it is always justice diminished.